Welcome to Writers on Writing. We're talking with author and poet Rajani LaRocca. Hi, Rajani. Thank you for sharing your writing secrets with us.
Hi, Rebecca. I'm excited to be here. I don't know if they're secrets. I will tell you about how I muddled through all the drafts.
Okay, perfect. That's awesome. So let's start with plot. How do you keep readers interested, page after page, and especially on a longer piece?
Yeah. So, okay. So what I will say is that I'm, in terms of like plotter versus pantser, I am a plantser. So I generally know the outline of the story, but I don't know every single thing that happens because to me that takes away some of the magic of writing. So I generally know, like I tend to know the big plot points, or at least kind of the big plot points of what happens in a story. And so by plot points, I mean, and I'm sure you talk to your students about this, I wish somebody had taught me this before I started writing. But like the first plot point where basically nothing is ever going to be the same again. There's like something big that happens, right? And then the midpoint, which is often the point where people are kind of like, I don't know what's going on with this book. And it starts to get a little saggy and a little bit boring. But I find that if you make the midpoint an exciting moment in and of itself, like another things are never going to be the same. And oftentimes I try to think about how the midpoint is when the main character stops reacting and starts acting. So some kind of big upsetting of the world where the main character is like, wait a minute. I can't just be like, okay, what do I do now? I've got a plan. I've got to figure out how to, achieve my goal. And then the third plot point being the low point, right? Where the thing that your character feared in the beginning of the book comes true.
Yes.
and then they have to figure out how to like deal with that. I usually know at least the feeling of how I want a story to end. If not exactly every single thing that happens, I kind of know big, in broad strokes what happens at the end. So I have that to begin with. And then I usually try and brainstorm a bunch of stuff that might happen in between all these plot points. And I try to brainstorm like a lot of things, like way more than probably could happen. Like I try to make a list of like 50 or 60 things. And then I go back and figure out which things seem interesting to me. And usually it's not the ones in the top 10 because like the first 10 things you think of are the things that probably everyone would think of. So I try to do that. And then I guess what I would say is that every scene and every chapter has the same kind of feeling as an overall novel, right? Every scene has this kind of expectation that you're setting up, something that your character wants, and then they either get it or they don't get it. And most times, because we're writing novels, we want them not to get it, right? We want to be a little bit mean to them. We want to be, we want them to struggle a little bit. And so there's kind of rising tension, and then there's a point in the scene where it's just like, oh no. And then you move on, right? Then the character has to make another decision. And I guess one of the big things that I learned when I was writing my first novel that I wish somebody had told me, or I wish like I had known earlier, is that the way to make a plot hold together is to make sure that everything that happens is a consequence of a choice that your character makes. So this is not to say that there are not some random events happening. And also not to say that the idea that the antagonist, if you have an antagonist, is not exerting some force, obviously. But the whole point of a book is to line up that plot so that it's a series of dominoes. And the thing that tips over each domino, not just the first one, is the choice that your character makes. So your character is faced with a situation in which they want something, they can't get it. And the choice that they make about what they do about that is like, individualized to that character, but also moves the next plot point. So if you can do that, if you can make it a series of decisions by your character that lead down a certain path, then your book is going to be interesting and it's going to hold together, and it's not going to feel like regular life, which is hard, right? Regular life is not that interesting. Like we can tell a story about it and we make it more interesting, but most of the time, random things happen, you deal with them, and then you just keep going. So we want a
Yeah.
book to be more interesting than regular life. Sorry, that was probably more information than you
Yes.
wanted.
No, that's perfect. I mean, because a lot of uh, beginning writers will just line up a lot of events, and I call it the action movie fallacy, which is sad because really good action movies do not make this mistake, but it's tempting to just have a lot of explosions and there's no sense of inevitability, or there's no sense that that I guess that there's momentum. It's just like event, 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 and they're disconnected. But as you're describing, this is a way to, if it's a consequence of choices all the way along, then it does cohere, and we feel like it's a story and not just random explosions. Yeah.
Right. So okay, I'm gonna tell you a secret. Don't hold this against me.
Okay.
Last night, so my children are out of the house. My husband is also on a trip right now, so I'm just alone. And last night, I saw that on HBO, X-Men: Days of Future Past was on. Okay, so I was joking with my daughter. I texted her and I was like, apparently I have an infinite capacity to rewatch this movie because like every time it's on, I'm like, whatever, I'll watch that. So I just have to tell you, just because we're speaking about plot, that movie is so tightly written. It's so good. It's a time travel movie. Have you seen it?
Mm-mm.
It's a time travel movie in which the X-Men of the future are about to be destroyed by these crazy machine things, and they have to send basically Wolverine back into the past, into his past self in 1973 to like prevent something from happening. And then you go and you meet younger Wolverine, you meet younger Professor X, and you meet younger Magneto, and you meet Mystique, right, who's Jennifer Lawrence. And
Nice.
so they're trying to prevent something from happening in the past that set up this future in which they all die. And it is so good. So there's this time travel, and every time you think, okay, like first of all, they want to do something, and then like everything goes wrong, right? But then they pull off this crazy escape. They break Magneto out of prison and all this stuff. And you think, okay, like, they're going to be able to achieve. Then Magneto does something that no one expects him to do. He's so like, he just sees through to like, what is the most expedient way to like fix this future that you're telling me about? And, and he goes for it. And you're like, oh my, so that's a kind of an example of like a really good, like even an action-packed movie like that involves so
Yes.
much nuance about characters making choices that are kind of unexpected, and you're like, oh my goodness, right? So
Yeah.